Okay, well, we're at time, so I am going to get started. So welcome everyone. It's nice to see so many faces. I'm Carolina. I go by Caro for the other Spanish speakers out there. I'm a consulting astrologer and an astrology teacher. So I've been working with Astro Butterfly for a couple of years now, running astrology webinars, helping to create astrology courses, and my favorite, which is working with students as a teacher on the courses as well. And I also have a private practice as a consulting astrologer. Like me, you're probably you're probably here because you're big fans of Astro Butterfly's newsletters or courses. You know, me too. Not only do I love and teach those Astro Butterfly's approach to astrology, but I've really loved being a part of the online astrology communities that we've built as well, both through the online courses and through the Age of Aquarius community, which we'll talk a little bit more about as well. So we've got about an hour for this call, and the idea here is to talk about the planets and psyche model, and I'll be giving some examples of how to apply it. I'll also hopefully have time for some questions from the audience, and for those of you who are interested in continuing to study the model and applying this model forward, as well as exploring other astrological topics, I'm also going to introduce an offer to join the Age of Aquarius community at the end. So there's a lot of you here, so I can't guarantee that I'll be able to follow the chat box. But since I will have time for questions, you'll be able to ask them at that time. So hopefully, if there's anything urgent, please do interrupt me because I'm not able to follow the chat box the whole time. So if for some reason you can't see what I think I'm showing or something like that, please just unmute then and make sure that you interrupt me. Okay, so let's get started. Most of you, I suspect, are already a little familiar with this model because Astro Butterfly recently shared it in a newsletter, and I think that's probably why a lot of you are here. It's quite interesting. So here we go. Can everyone see that? Yeah? Okay, thanks, Sharon. Okay, so Planets and Psyche, it's a framework developed by Astro Butterfly that shows the relationships between planets and the different parts of our psyche. It's a framework that's really useful for astrologers, of course, but even those of you with very little astrological knowledge, I think you'll find it a useful framework to think about how and where people get stuck in that. You know, as I imagine, oh, there we go. Oh. Let's try to mute the mics. There you go. As I imagine, many of you have already studied the meaning of the planets in astrology, and so you're familiar with this idea that planets correspond to different drives within us or different parts of our psyche. But this model takes it a little step further. According to this framework, planets and the corresponding, parts of our psyche, they build on each other's qualities according to their distance from the sun. So here we're going to look at the relationship the planets have with each other, working from the sun, that everything revolves around in our solar system, all the way out to the outer planets. And we want to think about how the planetary qualities build on each other and use this as a way to consider how our psychological processes develop. So this can help us understand where we're stuck in our developmental processes. It can help us address kind of specific pressing issues that we're going through in life. So I'm just going to start by going through the planets quickly to show how each psychological process associated with the planet builds on to the next one. Just as a quick point of orientation, we generally divide the planets into 3 categories. We've got the personal planets over here, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and they describe our personality, the most conscious part of us, really. Then we've got the 2 social planets. Those are Jupiter and Saturn, and they represent our relationships with society and groups of people. And finally, we've got the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and they influence us on a much more unconscious collective level. So diving in, most of what we end up focusing then are the more conscious planets for that reason, really, because those are the ones that we're more aware of how they're showing up for us. So we start here with the sun and the moon. These 2 together, they're going to comprise our core identity, right? So while the sun is the ego, it's our conscious, outward directed yang identity. The moon represents the inner emotional world. It's the body, and it's that receptive and reflexive yin identity. So together, these two form the core of our identity. Then we have Mercury. That's our data processor. It's our thoughts. It's our mental perceptions, right? And the way we communicate. So it's really how we express that identity. So we start with that identity, and then we go to Mercury, and that's the expression of identity. And therefore, it also really shows how we interact with the world. Like, it's kind of our first place outside of our inner world, right? In order to communicate, authentically, and to perceive the world in a way that supports us, we need to be clear on that core identity. Right. So do you see how you need to be connected to your sun and moon before you're able to do your Mercury before you're able to do it authentically? Obviously, we can all just spout out and do our Mercuries. But again, this is the idea of thinking about how these different parts of ourselves connect. And so you want that solid connection to the sun and moon, the identity, so that then your engagement with the world, the way that you first start processing and interpreting things and communicating, is aligned with that identity. And then from there, we move on to Venus. Once we've received all of that mercurial data, Venus begins to categorize it. It shows us the values that we place on all of that mercurial data. It's about how we feel about different things. It's how we feel about different people. So this is how we derive our values in the end. So really our values, according to this model, what it's showing us is that our values are a function of our perceptions and our thoughts. And then based on our Venus feelings and values, we take action in the world, and that's Mars, right? So while Venus is what we want, Mars is how we get it, how we go after it. So without that Venusian clarity, Mars's actions are going to be all over the place, right? So that's how we kind of think about how one builds on top of the other. And that gets us through all of the personal planets. And that takes us up to the point where we're taking action into the world. And then we hit the first of the social planets, Jupiter. And Jupiter in our psyche stands for the societal beliefs that we resonate with. It's those norms and codes of conduct that we think are going to help us succeed in life. And so, but with this framework, what we want to think about is how our beliefs are a function of the feedback that we're getting from society when we take that action. Right. So once we've expressed those 5 personal planets, culminating in the way we take action in the world, Mars, we begin to make sense of society, right? That's Jupiter. And we're doing that on the basis of how we're suddenly interacting in that world, and how well we're able to take the cues from the world. That's very Jupiter. And then make meaning and create and substantiate kind of the beliefs thanks to that feedback that we're getting. And again, here for each of the planets, we've written one word in parentheses to describe it. For those of you who are students of astrology, you know that obviously there's a lot more to Jupiter than just beliefs. There's a lot more to Mars than just action, but these are kind of like one keyword to help orient ourselves in terms of the meaning of each planet. And so then if we live by our Jupiter beliefs, we're eventually going to reap our Saturn results. Right? Jupiter is like the subjective expression of society. It's those unwritten norms and codes of conduct. And on a personal level, it's the way we understand and hold on to those norms and codes of conduct. But then Saturn is the more objective, concrete expression of society. It's going to be the rules and regulations and institutions. So Saturn also speaks to the way we choose to live by the rules of society. And therefore, it's also the results that we reap from the way that we live in society, right? In interaction with those rules and traditions. So, and that brings us really to the end of the social planets. This has been a very quick run through the major planetary archetypes. But I think the important thing here is that we want to be paying attention always how one leads into the next. That's kind of the key component of this framework, as opposed to other ways that you might have studied the planets first. There are the outer planets. So, right, while the personal planets and social planets represent conscious influences that we can integrate with relative ease into our psyche, these outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, they represent collective influences that are a bit beyond our conscious control. They're the collective unconscious, the the wisdom of our ancestors, the collective super consciousness, right? Are they're those possibilities that haven't yet been manifested in the physical plane. So they often manifest in our lives as fated events or influences, things that happen to us. We don't tend to feel usually in control of Plutonic or Uranian happenings. But still there's this clear connection between one and the next. So if our worldly accomplishments, right, our results, our Saturn, aren't in line with our purpose and with the best interest of the universe, then that's kind of when Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto are going to interfere to correct our path and make sure we get back on track. So these guys out here, they tend to manifest as those faded events and stuff like that because they're meant to be wake-up calls often, or sometimes they're presenting as new creative solutions that are meant to kind of nudge us onto a new path. But they do have that more external faded feel to them. Okay, and so there we have all the planets in relation to one another. There's of course much more to reading an astrological chart than this, but the nice thing about the planets in Psyche model is its relative simplicity, I think. It's a framework that we can use as a tool when we're working with a chart. But you don't have to be an advanced astrologer to make sense of it. It's in the end, it's an interesting framework to help us understand where we may be stuck in our developmental processes. You can apply the planets in Psyche framework to identify a particular area someone may need help with, right? So in other words, the point here is to help us diagnose a situation and think about where and how we might intervene. So for example, if someone's feeling out of touch with their purpose, if they're feeling lethargic or depressed, this is often an identity issue. And so here we would think, okay, we're going to go in, if you're an astrologer, we're going to go in analyzing sun and moon, and we're looking at it through that lens. If you're not an astrologer, you're saying, okay, let's think about the identity and how that's connected to this feeling of depression and lethargy. Mercury problems, if someone comes with clear communication problems, with learning problems, or they're stuck in a negative mindset, there we go. These would be Mercury problems, right? Venus problems, perhaps they're, have issues around their self-worth, they're having relationship issues, they don't know what they want, perhaps they're letting other people's preferences determine their own. Okay, well then we identify this diagnosis as a clear Venus issue. If someone comes to you and they're feeling stuck or bored, angry, resentful, haven't had any major changes in their life for a while, you note, aha, okay, this definitely sounds like a Mars issue, right? Mars issues. It might also be, anger, I said that already, but serious issues like kind of controlling the aggression that they feel, or on the other side, a sense that they can't assert themselves, Mars issue. Yes, I am recording the session. And then, yes, Jupiter issues. So that would be here, they maybe are getting conflict with other people. Remember, this is as a first social planet. They're finding it difficult to find friends or be included in society. There, they might be having issues with money as well. That's a very common Jupiter issues because often it's associated with, it's a problem with beliefs around abundance or a growth mindset or a lack of growth mindset. This is also all Jupiter issues. Saturn issues might manifest as problems with career, problems with authority is a very common Saturn issue as well. But also, fundamentally, Saturn is about that discipline to sustain your effort in order to achieve goals that are aligned with your beliefs, Jupiter, right? So this thing of like feeling like you're just not getting the results that you need in life, that's we're gonna want to look at Saturn for that as a Saturn issue. And then the last one here, someone is successful and accomplished already, by worldly standards, yet they still seem to feel like something's missing in their life. This can often be pointing to an outer planets problem, right? And so there we find that the solution can be found by focusing on their Chiron placement. Chiron is the bridge between those social planets and the outer planets. So its role is there really to help us find wholeness so that we can become receptive to the higher influences of those outer planets and discover, hidden gifts that we have often. And, Chiron is associated with having capacity for healing and being able to help others with specific issues. So Chiron in this framework, it's really the desire to merge with something greater. It's about embracing both your human material side, right, represented by the visible planets, and your spiritual side, right, and the unconscious forces of the universe, which are represented by the outer planets. Okay, and so as part of this diagnosis, once you decide to hone in on a specific planet, you can go deeper in analyzing that planet in the natal chart. Right. So in the case of relationship issues, again, you would look at your Venus sign, your house placement, any aspects Venus makes with other planets. That's how we would go about analyzing it astrologically. And then just for the intervention, right, to support a person in addressing those issues, this is quite interesting here too, because here the model suggests that you can go to the preceding planets or also the following planets. But while the planet before tends to point to the root cause of a problem, the planet often comes with a solution as well. I kind of think about this as like the difference between psychotherapy or counseling and coaching. Psychotherapy almost always asks you to look back to understand your current problems. So that would be the look backwards at the previous planets, while a coach might emphasize doing more of the subsequent planet, kind of, okay, actions you can take to step forward to kind of try to help bump you out of the stuckness of whatever situation you're in. So again, going back to the Venus example, if someone has relationship issues, right, Venus, the root cause is found by looking at the planet before Venus, which is Mercury. So to understand why they're struggling with their relationships, we can go in and talk about them, about their self-talk, perhaps. What are their internal dialogues about not only relationships, but also about their own self-worth, which is also very Venus. But another approach would be to go to the following planet, Mars, and encourage the person to actually take action. In this case, with Venus issues, we would ask them to work on aligning the way they pursue relationships with their values, right? So you want to work on that connection between the Venus and the Mars, aligning the action with the values. Perhaps this means going to more social engagements to meet people who they align with, or to go on more dates. So you're going to push them towards their Mars action to help them deal with those relationship Venus issues. Okay. Now let's get into a more specific example. Okay, so here it's someone that I've worked with. It's an example of someone who does not play well with others would be a simple way to describe it. He's never really found a social group where he feels he belongs. He's got a lot of trouble maintaining friendships. At multiple points in his life, he's found himself ostracized or kind of pushed out of friendship groups, while at other periods, he isolates himself from peer groups. Okay, so first let's diagnose it. What planet would we say that someone with that kind of issue is stuck at? What level would that kind of problem be?
Venus.
Interesting, Venus.
Jupiter.
Sorry?
Jupiter.
We got someone saying Jupiter. Yeah, it's kind of Venus or Jupiter. I purposely chose this example because it was one that I ended up contemplating a lot about, like, what's the difference between Venus and Jupiter in this case? Because when we hear relationships, we immediately want to jump to Venus, right? And that's possible, right? Because Venus is a lot about one-on-one relationships. Venus is very focused on those one-on-one contacts. And we know from the model that the root problem in one-on-one relationships is, the previous planet, Mercury, communication issues, as we just talked about. Now, you also said Jupiter, and because Jupiter, on the other hand, is more about the social environment, right? So here we would be asking, are the issues really around fitting in groups, or is it more about the one-on-one interaction with others, right? Does it tend to happen at the workplace or the school, for example? Because Jupiter is about the coherence of that social structure. And so in this case, actually, we were talking a little bit more about a Jupiter problem. In fact, he has never really found it too difficult to find girlfriends. That's kind of like the exception to the, to the issue. So he doesn't have as much issue on the one-on-one, yet he can't seem to fit in at school. And he feels like he never belongs. And, you know, and when he's had jobs, same thing, like feels kind of excluded in that sense. And he has trouble maintaining, feeling like he's a part of a group. So more Jupiter. And so as a first step here, we might explore the specific expression of his Jupiter. Now, here I'm going to show a chart. And for those of you who know how to read charts, you know, we would probably jump to look at Jupiter's position. Now, this isn't a chart reading course, so don't sweat it if this is gobbledygook to you. That's, again, the nice thing about this framework is that it can be useful no matter how much astrology you really know. But I did want to show the chart since this is how we would go through an analysis as a consulting astrologers or as someone who's kind of really more into us and using astrology as a tool. And in fact, we see that Jupiter is represented by this glyph here, and it is at the top of his chart, conjunct the midheaven and in Scorpio. So this is someone who holds specific beliefs, Jupiter, right, very strongly. Jupiter and Scorpio. Scorpio holds on to stuff. There's probably a really strong emotional connection and conviction to his beliefs, Scorpio, right? Because that Jupiter, and because that Jupiter is at the top of his chart, that's the midheaven here in the way that yes, I'm in Placidus house systems here. That's the midheaven, this little arrow. So because it's at the top of his chart, we know that his beliefs and social attitudes are also probably very visible. You know, anything that's up at the top of your chart by your midheaven is pretty visible to others. It's kind of like standing at the top of your chart there. So as someone with a Scorpio Jupiter, we know that he's interested, well, that he's uninterested really in fitting in just for the sake of fitting in. Generally, someone with a Scorpio Jupiter, that's not usually their thing. However, he's come to us with this very real problem that he wants to be part of a social group. But with Scorpio Jupiter, he needs that social group to feel authentic and really true to who he is, because that's Scorpio, right? These can't feel like superficial relationships. So again, in step one here, we're assessing what social values are important to him, what kinds of groups will feel right to him. And so that's kind of our first entry, can just be a simple analysis of the sign and location of the planet in the chart. Anyway, you know, we could go deeper by analyzing the aspects that his Jupiter is making and seeing what insight we gain there. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm not going to dive that deep here. All of this analysis really could also just be done through conversation with the person. You know, as a coach or a counselor, that's what you'd be doing. So while the astrologers out there might immediately note that, you know, that T-square that Jupiter is in with Sun and Mars, a counselor can ask questions about how his Jupiter drives and qualities are expressing, right? So Jupiter is related to the way we interpret social cues and norms, you know, and how those shape our beliefs about society and about our place in our social world. So here we'd be exploring the way he sees himself in relation to others, you know, how social norms influence him, his beliefs about social norms. And you could do all of that through questions, right? As astrologers, most of us would do it by analyzing the placement, right? And so for example, someone with a Jupiter problem who has Jupiter in Pisces is not the same as someone with a Jupiter problem who has Jupiter in Scorpio, right? In Pisces, their Jupiter problem, it's more likely to manifest as being lost, maybe in a sea of others' beliefs and opinions, or perhaps morphing too much to fit in, right? But here we're looking specifically at this placement. We know that just the clue of the Scorpio, we know that's not really the issue. And then once you start going to T-squares, then you know, the furthermore advanced astrologers, you kind of start to get a sense of what kind of issues are pressing up on this person's Jupiter. Yeah, so the point here really is that we're simply at step one, looking at the problem planet. Just that is going to give you a lot of insight and being able to say like, oh, okay, being able to just diagnose the issue and associate it with a specific planet and then looking at that planet's placement, just that is going to give you a lot of really interesting information and way to talk to a person about it. But then, you know, the suggestion with this framework is that we can also support a person in addressing their issues by looking at the planet that precedes and follow the problem planet, right? So in terms of Jupiter, we'd be looking at Mars as the planet before. That's the root cause of the problem. And while the planet following Jupiter, Saturn, can suggest a solution. So, you know, if we want to help him gain insight into the root of his problem, we might want to talk to him about how his behavior, right, the actions he takes in social situations is leading to his conflicts. We could work with him to reflect on how he approaches social situations, how his ego perhaps is taking up too much space and pushing people away. And I'm saying this because I saw the T-square. We know that when a person has serious trouble accepting social feedback, you know, they just they might keep doing the same thing. We're going to see the same Mars behavior without enough of a change in the Jupiter. So here we want to focus on how the person's hearing and applying the feedback they get about their behavior. And in this case, you know, he really does have trouble accepting social feedback. He has a pretty defiant attitude and refuses to conform to social norms for the most part, mostly because he's decided that he doesn't care. And besides, he's right, which is kind of clear also in his chart in other ways. But really, a lot of people get stuck because of their Mars. Remember, Mars is the last of the personal planets. And so when we're having trouble with the link to Jupiter, it's because we're too much in our own world in some way, whatever that might be. It's too much on our own issues. You know, in this case, it's someone who has a tendency to be quite bullheaded, but like other people Mars's problems will express differently. So, but with this person, you know, given that the main issue he's presenting or coming to us with is a difficulty in fitting in, we do want to gut in deeper into how he's expressing his Mars, you know, how he behaves in social situations and expresses his will, and how that's impeding him from feeling like he's fitting in. You know, and flashing again quickly to his chart, we do see that Mars is at the bottom of his chart in Taurus. It's another very stubborn sign. It's opposite Jupiter. And so, you know, he's very self-driven, loves to assert himself and make statements about how he's against this or against that, what he believes, you know, so we hear a strong Mars, and that, you know, the fact that they're in opposition, it suggests that this is a core source of his conflicts with people. You know, people see him as very assertive, sometimes aggressive, and probably having quite a touchy ego as well. So to help him, we would help him reflect on his behavior, right? And the way he stubbornly asserts himself, Scorpio, with those very deep convictions, and how that's creating friction in his life. And because we know that moving from Mars to Jupiter requires paying attention to the social feedback we receive, we can work with him to recognize more subtle social cues about when might be a good or bad time for asserting his opinions. You know, and as astrologers, we might want to go deeper, noting that he has, you know, Mars trine Libra as well, you know, or the sextile between Jupiter and Venus. And these might, you know, these say, oh, okay, there's a lot of charm, and there's probably relationships in his life where he is very sensitive to others' needs. So much like if you're a coach or a counselor, we might draw him into conversations about those relationships that do work for him to help him get in touch with the skills that he already has in that arena and see how he can apply them to new social situations and groups. I do see a question. Ascendant doesn't seem to feature in this model. No, this model is very focused on the planets. And that's not to say this, it doesn't matter. And remember, this is one framework and one way to cut into things. It's not like it's gonna access every part of someone's chart. So I see a hand up, Julia.
Hey, God.
How are you?
Just wondering, what are your thoughts? Because in this case, if we're talking about beliefs, the beliefs also, I think, are strongly connected to, like you said, the self-talk and kind of the dialogue that you're having with yourself, also to kind of confirm those beliefs besides everything else. So I'm just wondering, how do you work with things where there seems to be kind of multiple planets or stages feeding into like the stuckness? Like it's not only maybe the Mars, not only the Saturn.
It's never only one thing. Yeah.
Right.
Welcome to human nature. Yes. Right. That's key. Yeah.
Or are we talking about like the previous planet and next planet? Is that just maybe at the point where you can get them a little dislodged or unstuck, and then you go into the other things? Kind of, is that?
Yeah. a framework, like a way to kind of
Yeah.
cut in. That's how I think of it. It's kind of like an interesting way to think like, okay, also like just that first link of saying, oh, wow, this is a Jupiter problem. Then thinking about everything that Jupiter encompasses, just that can be super, super useful. And then thinking, okay, now next I'll go and think about how Mars feeds into it, And so these are kind of like a map, a framework to help you figure out how to cut in. And of course, this person, in the end, people usually who have ego issues or like, assert themselves too much. Also, you can go back to their Venus issues. You can also go back to, certainly the way they communicate. And then certainly maybe at core, there's an issue with your identity. So it's kind of like, where are you cutting in at this? That's
my next question, which is interesting, even from a coaching perspective. So you would kind of gradually peel back, still using the model, going back one planet at a time. So we'd go back to Mars and then gradually approach Venus and then Mercury.
I think so. Yeah. That's how I would do it. And exactly. I think you can always come into it differently. And so that's why it's kind of like, okay, what's the presenting issue? That's almost always when you're a coach or a counselor, someone's coming in with the initial presenting issue. So that's just kind of the first way. And why do you start with that? Really, it's because, well, that's why that's where you've got their attention, right? That's why they're there. That's why they're there to talk to you. So it's kind of it's an easy in. Right. Yeah. But yeah, I think very often you can, that's what's really interesting about the framework, really, right? Is just the thinking of how one links to the other. I think it kind of gives you a little pathway, to analyze things and to work with people.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. No, thank you. And so that would all just be about focusing on the root problem. That would be kind of focusing on Mars for the Jupiter issue. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, I'd say that's where most of the work needs to be done, is going backwards rather than going forward. But as that link gets resolved, as you start working on that Mars to Jupiter link, we can also encourage the person to start working the link with the following planet, right? Often the following planet can help draw us forward as well. So in this case, we'd be looking at Saturn. And here Saturn is the sustained effort we put into achieving the results we want, right? So here we're encouraging a Saturnian approach to solving the problem, right? And so we start to think about Saturn. Saturn asks us to be humble, right? Often its lessons are around recognizing hierarchies that already exist. We can talk to this person about his own Saturnian expression, right? We can also help him see how his success, right, Saturn, or lack thereof, right, is connected to the way he interacts in social groups. And we can help him see how he will mature, Saturn, and find more lasting relationships if he shows discipline, Saturn, and respect, Saturn, for social cues, right? Those that feel authentically aligned to him, of course, right? That's always key, going back to his kind of core issues. But that's kind of the way we would think about how maybe the next planet can also be an interesting way to think about it. What time is it? 6:30. I think we have time for one more example. Or maybe just before I move, were there any questions about that example? I did see some things going up. I don't know if there's just commentary, if there's potentially narcissistic. Why don't we look at Aquarius? They detach and don't care about what people think. Okay, so that was a reference to the chart itself. And that's the thing. Once you open up a chart, you guys may or may not have noticed he had a sun in Aquarius and other things like that. Sure. I mean, it's kind of getting to Julia's question. This always, everyone, we have all these facets of our personality, and part of the reason that this person expresses the way they do is because of all of the other different planets in the chart. So it's kind of, this is really like, okay, we can cut in this way. This would be one way to approach it, start looking at that. But of course, if you're working as an astrologer with someone's chart, you're always going to be considering the entire balance of their chart and how that works to wire them the way that they're wired. Okay, I think that was the only more. Yeah, Moon and Libra. Yeah, and so how would Saturn in this chart give solutions, right? So it's kind of that concept. In his case, actually, I mean, again, I don't want to divulge too much into too much detail of the chart, but it is quite interesting that Saturn happens to be in the 7th house for him as well. So we do know that Saturn is quite linked to relationship issues as well. But in terms of in the general framework, without even diving specifically into his placements, it's this idea of thinking about Saturnian qualities, that idea of being more humble, of really getting dedicated to the results that you want. That I think of as very Saturnian. So it's kind of what we could be encouraging the Saturnian approach to dealing with his problems. I'm going to give this other example. This one's familiar to some of you who are just in this certification course. This was a 40-year-old woman who had a very successful career as an editor, who was earning a nice 6-digit income, very well respected at work, but felt deeply empty. Like fundamentally felt an emptiness inside. So let's diagnose it first. What would be the problem? This kind of sense of emptiness. She had it all. Everything was working well. Still something felt like it was missing.
That would be an outer planet, right?
Yeah, I see Venus come up there as well. But yes, yeah, exactly. I think this is a kind of a good classic case of a Chiron problem. Again, outer planet issue, but like we think of Chiron as that bridge into those outer planets, right? Already successful and accomplished, but the wound seems to be at the soul level in some way. I often think of Chiron problems as kind of like existential, but existential at the time when that's really what's pressing on you. Right, because remember, Chiron's that bridge between reality and the unknown, right? Between that visible world and the invisible. So, in the previous example, we saw how Mars is actually the bridge between our personal world, how we think of ourselves and how we like to behave, and the social world, right? And Mars becomes key to integrating those two. Here I'm looking at a case where we really want to focus on Chiron to help integrate that material world with that larger sense of meaning. And Chiron's energy is not completely under our control, but it's also not totally outside of our awareness. And that's why we say we're working with Chiron rather than like, working with Pluto. It's really, in terms of this model, we focus kind of on Chiron as being that last frontier where we have a little bit more direct awareness and control of it. The invitation here when working with Chiron is to embrace both your human and spiritual side, right? It's that need to merge to something greater. So you kind of want to embrace that more spiritual side that you have to you. So we've got a couple questions here. Sam?
Hi, yeah. Just about Chiron. I have Chiron in Aries, and when Chiron's in Aries, it's actually between Neptune and Uranus. And obviously sometimes it comes between Saturn and Jupiter, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's really, exactly. It's a really abnormal orbit in that sense.
Yeah, so I struggle to get that, because for me it's like the bridge. What is it the bridge to? Because for me, I think it's the bridge between Neptune and Uranus.
Yeah, I think again, it's more because it's the last of the more observable planets. I mean, you never, that's why kind of, again, it's in the model. In the model, it's kind of seen as that point between the two worlds. And why do we see Chiron? Because it does move kind of more over here sometimes, so we can actually spot it, right? So it has just that fluidity, Chiron, in its movement, in its astronomical movement, right? It has that fluidity of bridging those different worlds. And that's why, but you're right, this isn't accurate in terms of the fact that it's not always between Saturn and Uranus, but it does move between the visible and the invisible planets. And that's more the point.
Right. Yeah, cool. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Julia, do you have another question, or is your hand still up from before?
Yeah, no, I do. Because originally when you brought up, I was wondering, perfect example for me, because I was thinking of Saturn, but then I started thinking, but what if it's really about purpose and identity, which is kind of the sun? And then, like Sam said, I also have Chiron in Aries, but what's interesting, it's in the 10th house. So there's always been kind of that success, but still that search of like identity and who am I and how do I really present that to the outer world. So it's almost like, how do you merge, going back to what you're saying, like your real identity with how you're seen like Saturn professionally in the world. So I don't know if that's Aries position.
Do you want me to solve your Chiron problem?
What?
I could just solve your Chiron problem. No, it's interesting that you should mention, because in her chart as well, she has Chiron in the 10th. And this is not uncommon, that like people's biggest presenting issue or big, is a quite prominent planet in their chart, right? I mean, I kind of, it's more, no one's not going to solve any problem like from one day to the next.
Yeah.
But the fact that Chiron issues are often linked with identity, I think I think that's very true. But it's especially true for people who have things like Chiron in aspect to Moon, Chiron in aspect to Sun, right?
Right.
So you're going to look at how Chiron is linked in your chart as well. I mean, I think that becomes really relevant.
So you wouldn't necessarily go back to the sun and purpose from that perspective of like the solar identity. You would still look at Saturn and the planet that comes next, or
Yeah, I think so. Again, like with this model, in terms of the idea of the kind of how to cut in,
right.
That's more the idea,
Okay.
and in this case specifically, how would we advise, or how did we kind of work with Chiron? It's about asking her to kind of get vulnerable, allowing transformation to happen, right? It's because this is the into those outer uncontrollable planets to some degree. The idea is, the more you're able to embrace Chiron, to recognize your vulnerabilities and also come to appreciate them as a gift, the more you're able to embrace your spirituality and to feel truly connected to that, the more you'll feel a higher sense of meaning and connection. So working with Chiron, it means addressing those inner child wounds, right? Like those kinds of inner things that carry. And it also means working to connect to something greater, right? Embracing our spirituality. That is all going to allow us to be more receptive to the higher influences of the outer planets and to discover, what that gift is. And it's no coincidence that at this juncture in her life, this person was also undergoing a really serious Pluto transit. She had Pluto sitting right here on her sun. And, which went, not only was Pluto on her sun, it was also squaring her natal Pluto. So she was always going through her Pluto square. And if I recall correctly, she also had Uranus transiting up here opposing her moon. So she was going through clear outer planet transits. And it's no coincidence then that's why like she's coming to us with this kind of issue, which is an outer planet issue in some way. And we're saying, okay, well, let's look at Chiron, right? And part of, I think, addressing Chiron is looking at how we're doing Saturn, right? Since Saturn is the last of the more social planets. It's the structure of our life, right? And how we kind of materialize things. And I think it's no coincidence that Anne here also has very strong Saturnian influence in her chart, right? She's Capricorn sun, and Saturn and Mercury are in mutual reception. So part of her helping her work on her Chiron was helping her let go actually of some of her Saturnian rigidity around what was right, and how society defines accomplishment, and and kind of like the traditional vision of what career was supposed to be. I mean, and during this time, together we spoke a lot about spirituality, how she could work to embrace that side of her. It turned out she had a ton of secret spiritual interests, like things like astrology, as it turns out, tarot. She was really into like manifestation tools, that kind of thing. But she had generally been quite embarrassed to share that. And that year she became much more open about it all. And again, having Chiron in the 10th house also suggests that healing wounds was something that she could become known for, right? In fact, that year she also started writing and much more about self-help podcast. She started a podcast, and she eventually had a full career change into coaching. And that kind of helped, again, so it was the sense of like having to let go first of the Saturnian stuff she had set up, of having this kind of very much more traditional career, so that she could, working through Chiron to kind of embrace all those changes. So it was actually a pretty interesting case.
I have to laugh because on some level, I think you just described the journey of my life. No, but also I think what's interesting is that I'm a little bit over 50, and I have to say, looking backwards, I think the biggest shift with that Chiron return was at age 50. but
Mhm.
also with those major kind of transits and other things. So I think also age probably plays a big part with Chiron, because
Yes.
you gradually have to get to that point where I think you're able to release into kind of the bigger vision.
I agree. Chiron and the nodes. I mean, I think, yeah, they're very,
Yeah,
you kind of
but
just
thank you. Yeah,
come to
perfect
them.
example. Thank you.
Yeah. Claudia,
Yes, thank you,
Hi there.
Carol. Nice seeing you.
nice to see you.
I found also very interesting in her chart that she has plenty of earth element. So all the stellium here in Virgo, and in trine with her conjunction Sun Mercury in Capricorn, and the Chiron there in Taurus.
Mhm.
And so I felt like what you're talking about, the model that's really so fascinating and really brilliant, is that if you look into elements also about coaching and analyzing her psychics field,
Mhm.
we go into water, for example, maybe to dissolve or to soften all that structure and really, rigidity. And when you go into the Neptune position here in Sagittarius, it's quite interesting and to see this in the fifth house. Is in the fifth house? No, the
Yeah,
sixth house.
it's the fifth house. Yep.
Yeah. And so, how this could be also one of her ventures, as you were mentioning, the spirituality for her in Sagittarius, here Neptune in Sagittarius, and her interest about spirituality and being more. And this also Plutonian placement in her Libra, right, in the fourth house.
Yeah, and that I see. Yeah.
So
exactly.
seems to be
and that's exactly it. I mean, you go in with kind of like, okay, these are themes that we're talking about, but then you can go, the more astrology you're doing, like, you just go concretizing it within the chart. You go going deeper and deeper in the chart, looking at what skills, what opportunities there are, where the blocks are, that you're going just deeper into the chart to look, to get more clues.
So the elements could be also a guideline that you could look
Absolutely.
into to give balance and
The whole chart is, right? And so as part of a chart
sure.
analysis, right, you'd be, as part of a chart analysis, that you're right, you're absolutely right. That's one of the main things that would stand out about this chart, is the really strong earth element there. And that can be both a block and a gift, right? Of course.
Exactly.
Like every single
gives a lot of
placement we all have.
structure. Yes, leave a lot of grit and ground for her to perform. But yet the disconnect with also this Venus in Aquarius, about her feelings and values, and feel exactly what she wants to, like, go into the emotions and the element of Moon and in Scorpio and go deep. I mean, that's it's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Claudia. Oh dear. Okay, we've managed to kill almost an hour. Look at that. As you know, I could go on. Yeah, so I mean, I did want to have, I'm glad that we've had some questions go in here. I know there's a few more questions I want to address. Do the nodes have a role in the model? Again, no, not in this one specific one that we've laid out. Again, I think this one is really one that's based on kind of the movement from Sun going outwards, but are the nodes important? Yeah. Right. So again, it's this idea of, this is kind of, again, just one interesting framework way to cut in. It's not the only way you analyze a chart, of course, and it's certainly not the only way you would work with someone with their chart, because as you guys have pointed out very well, once you then kind of crack open the nut, there's all these other ways that you can go in and support a person and see what they're going through. Great. Before we can come back to this, I did want to talk a little bit. I want to make sure I mention the age of Aquarius stuff, because that's what we have to mention as well. Here it is. Okay. Yeah, I mean, and basically the idea here, I want to just mention, I know some of you are in Age of Aquarius. This is the online community that's related to Astro Butterfly. And this Planets and Psyche framework, for example, is one that was first presented through that community. So if you'd like to study this model further, you know, we do go much more into depth in this community. We discuss various topics. Right now, we're doing this thing where we study one planet every month. Like, so this month we started with the sun and we're going to finish with Pluto in December. As part of this community, you get access to trainings, to live calls. There's always some sort of assignment, a challenge, you know, and in addition to the Planets and Psyche, there's like a kind of video training there. There's also other resources. There's tons of other videos on trainings on various topics, on progressions, on various techniques, different things that we do like that. We also have chat channels where you can ask questions or join existing discussions. We also help, this is a really interesting new thing that we're doing. We help facilitate the formation of small study groups and professional groups where you can discuss issues with other consulting astrologers if you're a professional astrologer, or people who are starting out their astrology practices, or just people who are trying to learn more. So we have beginner groups, advanced groups. I wanted to share with you because I've gotten a lot of questions about this recently, also what the actual platform looks like. So I'm going to just quickly, there we go. Can you see that? So this is the platform. So we've got, you know, kind of general discussions. There's resources where you have tutorials, various trainings, various webinars. The circles is going to be where we end up creating smaller groups. There's the resources here. There's other different trainings on different topics. So it's really user friendly. There's a cool new app as well. So I'm here to answer any questions about that you may have. And if you want to join, I did just have up the how to join. There's right now there's a special offer for the members who are on this call. If you join now, you get a $50 discount. So you'd be paying $250 a year instead of the regular $290 a year, and you get locked into that price for as long as you stay a member. So to access that discount, just go here, and in the coupon section, you would put in the code PLANETS, okay? And I believe the coupon's only valid for today. So if you want to join. And actually in another hour, we have our first monthly member call in AOA, which I'm going to be on as well. So, so if you join right now, you can join that call too. So that's my pitch for the AOA. And I'm here to answer any questions about that, any questions about the model. I know that I've gotten some by email, and any other questions you might have. Who developed the model? Astro Butterfly. So it's part of the Astro Butterfly kind of content, the same newsletters that you get. The courses are developed by Astro Butterfly. I support also in the kind of creation of contents, and I tend to do more of the online teaching. Is it only an annual payment, or are there monthly paying options at all? As far as I know, it's just an annual payment. Right now, but we can find out. You can, if you go to that site, there'll be a question that you can ask. If you guys have any more questions about the Planets and Psyche model as well, I'm more than happy to talk about that. I just wanted to make sure I got to this because I have a way of running through and running out of time. What about outer planets and their separate meanings? Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, again, I think they really matter. And for sure, some people just kind of generally struggle with Neptune versus struggling people who are more Plutonic. But they're here in terms of identifying presenting issues. It's just not one of the ones that we focus on. The idea was like we tend to focus on the more visible planets as presenting issues, and then everything else we lump on as Chiron going into it. So that's part of this model. I saw a hand go. Yeah, was it Claudia? Oh, I've lost.
I had a question about the reference to planets before and after.
Yeah.
What planet would the sun refer to if we're looking before?
Ooh, good point. No, I think that's it. No, it kind of, the idea is that it starts with the sun. Even like with moon, I don't know that you would necessarily go to sun, right? Sun and moon are kind of, or again, the yin yang. So there you're just usually working with identity in general. I think it's also very hard to speak about the sun without speaking about the moon as well. It ends up being kind of tied in. So no, there you're kind of just starting with those two as the end point. Julia, did you have another question?
Yeah, I did. A little bit off of this, for instance, since I took the course with the business, I emailed but I didn't get an answer as far as repeating the course. Do you have any idea if I wanted to go through the course again, would I need to pay the entire fee again, or is there some sort of discounted price for those who want to repeat it?
Are you talking about the certification course?
Yeah,
Okay. Did you take it last year or you took it this year? I can't remember.
no, I think last year.
It was last year. Okay, there's, I know that there's usually some sort of a discount if you want to retake it live. I assume that's what you mean, to retake it live.
Yeah.
You have lifetime access. That's the great thing about Astro Butterfly's courses. You have lifetime access to her course, the course material. But yeah, to retake it live, you kind of have to wait till the next start point, and then and almost always there's an offer for people who already.
Okay, should I email Angelina about it, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Info at astrobutterfly.com
Mhm.
is the place to go for those things. And we'll do it again. We'll be offering the certification course again next September. It'll start in September.
In September.
Yeah, not until then. Now we have other courses coming up in the spring term, as I like to think of it, but the certification course, it starts in the fall.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Claudia?
Yes, thank you. I think that maybe my question relates to, or my comment relates to what Julius was mentioning about where you go after, because in regards of the identity issue. So I was perceiving the possibility of working with sun moon pairing as shadow work as well. So once something that is revealed in your main self identity, you can look into the shadow of the moon and working with some other feminine elements that can bring information about the identity, the shadow of identity that the sun blocks when the moon is there, and so complementing each other. Do you approach that archetypal well in the model of working with identity?
That's interesting. Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to approach it. That's a really interesting way to approach it. I think that in the end, when I'm looking at sun moon issues, it's so kind of contingent, again, as an astrologer who works with charts, it's going to be so contingent on specifically the setup of that individual sun moon, right?
Yeah.
But I think as generally just kind of speaking archetypally and just cutting in generally, I think that's ideal, looking at that shadow side, looking at the receptive side versus the exterior. That's why I was saying, like, I think it's very difficult to work with the sun without at least glancing at the moon, right? You kind of need both sides of that.
Yeah.
And oftentimes identity issues are precisely about that lack of balance between the two and your lack of connection with one versus the other. I've found that that's very common as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Any other questions I can answer about the model that we presented here, or about AOA or the courses or anything else? There's a question here. Who heads AOA? It's owned by an astrologer. Her name is Angelina. She's the owner of it. But there's a number of us astrologers that work for Astro Butterfly, the company and AOA. But it is owned by one individual. It's a private company owned by one individual. And she creates most of the newsletters. I mean, I think all of the newsletters are created by her. Brilliant astrologer. She's very good. She's on AOA, so if you're on AOA, you'd be those of you who are AOA chat with her all the time. Great, thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Yes, there is going to be a replay. We did record it. And so if you registered, you'll get a copy of the replay. Astro Butterfly does not do consultations. In terms of Angelina, the owner, doesn't. Will this be shared again? Yeah, so I mentioned that. Great, thank you guys. Oh. In terms of, so I see a lot of questions, also kind of more specific things about other parts of your chart. And for that, again, we're talking about more deep natal chart analysis. So we don't presume that the planets and psyche model will answer all of your questions about any natal chart. Obviously, for that, you go in much deeper into a natal chart analysis, which is very important. Great. Okay, guys. That's it. I'll stick around here a little bit longer if you have any questions. I'm going to stop the recording though. Can you Oh, yeah, definitely. I can suggest a good place to start learning astrology. Well, our courses are a great place to start learning. We actually do have a beginner's course and an advanced course. So very much recommended my classes and Astro Butterfly's classes in general. And again, like things like the astrology community that that we're talking about here, Age of Aquarius, it's there's people who know nothing more than their sun sign there. And then there are consulting professional astrologers on there. So it's this realm also where you slowly digest things based on your level. I mean, it can be overwhelming if you get caught in a really, I guess, more advanced discussion, but there's always room for people that are kind of at your lower level. And then, yes, for sure, I can recommend books and things like that for beginners as well. But we do have a kind of 10-week beginner's course that we teach starting in the fall as well, if you're interested. I'm still sharing this.